Drive south out of Lafayette and the land begins to run out. Not suddenly. The rice fields give way to sugarcane, the sugarcane gives way to marsh grass, and somewhere past Houma, the road becomes a raised line of asphalt with open water on both sides of it. There are still houses out here, up on pilings, boats tied underneath. There are still shrimp docks and boudin shops and Catholic churches with French surnames cut into the cornerstones. This is Cajun Country, and most people carry a reasonably clear picture of it. Cypress and Spanish moss, an accordion and a fiddle, a pot of crawfish on a folding table, a language the old people still speak and the young ones mostly don't. And underneath the picture, a quiet assumption about what is happening to it, that the water is rising, the storms keep coming, and a beautiful place is going under the way. Coastlines everywhere are going under. That picture is not wrong. It is missing the part that explains it. What is happening to this coast is not weather, and it is not erosion in the ordinary sense. It is the accumulated result of a long sequence of specific human decisions, each with a date, a cost, and a signature on it. If this is the kind of thing you want more of, subscribing helps more than you would think. Because there is a ribbon of 9-foot grass growing beside a railroad track in Evangeline Parish that is nearly the last surviving acre of the landscape the Cajuns actually settled. There is a pump station at Donaldsonville, pushing a thin stream of Mississippi water over a levee into a channel that used to carry the river itself. And on the west bank of the Mississippi near Ironton, there is a concrete intake structure, half-built and stopped, with the river sliding past it, carrying exactly the sediment it was designed to catch. That last one is where this starts. The version of the story that circulates most often is a story about scarcity. Louisiana is fighting to save its coast and losing. The problem is too big, the money is not there, Washington is not interested, and the state is doing what it can with what it has. The money was there. On the 17th of July 2025, the state of Louisiana formally terminated the Mid-Barataria Sediment Diversion. It was the largest single ecosystem restoration project in American history, and it had been the cornerstone of Louisiana's own coastal master plan since 2007. The idea behind it was almost embarrassingly simple. The Mississippi carries sediment. The levees hold that sediment inside the channel and fire it off the edge of the continental shelf. Mid-Barataria would have cut a controlled opening in the levee near Ironton, about 60 river miles below New Orleans, and let as much as 75,000 cubic feet of sediment-loaded water per second run back into the basin the river used to build. Projected result: as much as 21 square miles of new land. This was not a proposal. Ground was broken in August 2023. Roughly $560 million had already been spent. The full cost, around $2.9 billion, was covered by Deepwater Horizon settlement money that could not legally be spent on much else. The Army Corps suspended the permit that spring. In July, the body overseeing the spill funds agreed to terminate the project outright. In October, the state canceled the companion diversion at Mid-Breton as well. Louisiana still holds more than $8 billion set aside for coastal restoration. So a state losing a football field of wetland roughly every hour and a half walked away from a funded, permitted, partially built plan to manufacture 21 square miles of new ground. Here is what makes this difficult, rather than simply infuriating. The opposition did not come from outside. Oyster fishermen and shrimpers in plaque mines in Barataria fought the project for years. Because freshwater on that scale would have changed the salinity their entire livelihood is built on. Their argument was that the diversion would save the land by killing the people standing on it. The governor cited cost, oxygen depletion, harm to the fishery around Grand Isle, and drinking water supply. He also wrote that the basin would likely convert to open water by around 2070. Regardless, coastal scientists disputed several of those claims and pointed out that if the last one is true, It also undercuts the smaller projects the state says it still supports. When the cancellation was announced, environmental groups issued statements of grief. In the fishing communities on the coast that is disappearing, people celebrated. The intake structure is still standing at Ironton. Poured concrete, stopped mid-build, with the Mississippi running past it, full of the sediment it was meant to catch. This coast is not slipping away for lack of a plan. The plan was canceled. Go west from Lafayette instead of south, out toward Crowley and Eunice, and the ground is dead flat and cultivated to the horizon. Rice, then crawfish ponds, then sugarcane, then more rice. It reads as farmland, and it reads as the natural condition of the place. It is neither before any of it was plowed. Southwest Louisiana was covered by roughly 2.5 million acres of tallgrass prairie, treeless. Native grasses and wildflowers standing 6 to 9 feet high, broken only by narrow strips of forest along the bayous. It was the southernmost reach of the American tallgrass prairie, and it held bison, red wolves, whooping cranes, and prairie chickens. Less than 1% of it is left. Estimates of the surviving remnant range from under 100 acres to a few thousand, depending on who is counting and what qualifies as intact. Every estimate agrees on the shape of the number. The loss exceeds 99%. And the survivors are in a strange place. Most are narrow strips running alongside railroad tracks, many under 100 feet wide, the longest unbroken stretches shorter than a mile. They are still there because the railroads never had a reason to plow their easements. This is where the Acadians settled. The Prairie parishes, Acadia, Evangeline, Vermilion, St. Landry, are the demographic heart of Cajun Country. The culture grew on grassland. The rice and cane and crawfish ponds that now read as authentically Cajun are what replaced it. Stand at one of the railroad remnants in late summer and you can see the whole story in one frame. A band of 9-foot grass and wildflowers, 50 feet across. A rail line on one side, a rice field on the other, running to the horizon. The swamp is real. It is just not where most of these people came from. Between 1932 and 2010, the United States Geological Survey measured a net loss of 1,883 square miles of coastal Louisiana. By the 2016 update, the figure had passed 2,000. That is about a quarter of everything that was there. In 1932, the comparison people usually reach for is a football field. One lost every hour at the worst measured rate, one every 100 minutes at the slower recent rate. It is a good line, and it has been used a great deal. The harder number is the percentage. A quarter of the land area of coastal Louisiana has already converted to open water, and the overwhelming majority of that happened inside a single human lifetime. Louisiana accounts for roughly 80% of all wetland loss in the United States. The rate has actually slowed since its peak in the mid-1970s. The survey attributes that partly to marsh construction projects, partly to a stretch of years without a catastrophic storm, partly to the decline of oil and gas extraction in the inshore marshes, and partly to something bleaker. The most exposed wetlands are already gone. There is less left to lose in the places that were losing fastest. The barrier islands are further along. They have lost more than 40% of their area in a century. Some of them more than 75, and several are projected to erode away completely within about 30 years. Those islands are the first thing a storm surge meets. Lay a 1932 survey map beside a recent satellite image of the same parish, and the effect is disorienting. The old map has named communities, roads, cemeteries. The new image has water where the names were. In 1903, the Army Corps of Engineers closed the mouth of Bayou Lafourche where it left the Mississippi at Donaldsonville. The reason was flooding. The bayou overflowed, the overflow was expensive, and the landowners upstream wanted it stopped. What stopped was more than the flooding. Bayou Lafourche was the Mississippi's largest distributary. Somewhere between 800 and 2,500 years ago, it had been the Mississippi's main channel. It ran 106 miles to the Gulf, carrying river water, river sediment, and river nutrients the entire way. The ground that Lafourche and Terrebonne parishes sit on is ground that Bayou Lafourche built. Before the closure, peak flows through it exceeded 100,000 cubic feet per second. After 1903, that number was 0. The first Acadians in Louisiana settled along this bayou and the river coast above it, in large part because the better land upriver was already claimed. They settled on the newest ground in North America, in the middle of the process that was still making it. Then, the process was switched off in a single act for a reason that had nothing to do with them. A pumping plant went in around 1955 and restored a trickle roughly 200 cubic feet per second. A new pump station under construction now is designed to move up to 1,500. That is still somewhere near 1.5% of what the bayou carried on its own. Project runs about $230 million, and roughly 300,000 people across 4 parishes now drink what it delivers. Stand at Donaldsonville, and you can watch it happen. A pump on a levee, pushing a thin stream of Mississippi water into a channel that used to be the river. Everything downstream of it has been sinking ever since. If you grew up on one of these bayous, or you have driven Highway 1 down to Grand Isle, tell us in the comments what you thought this place was before you knew any of this. The comments on these are consistently better than the video. What comes next goes underneath the ground. The standard explanation for the disappearing marsh is planetary in scale. The sea is rising, the levees have cut off the sediment, and the delta is drowning under forces nobody controls. Both of those things are true, and neither is the whole picture. Starting in the 1930 seconds, oil and gas companies dredged canals through the marsh, straight deep channels to float rigs, crews, barges, and pipeline into places that had never had access to anything. By 1990, there were something over 10,000 miles of them. The mud that came out was piled along the edges as spoil banks, which function as low walls across a landscape whose entire survival depends on water and sediment moving freely across its surface. Researchers at Louisiana State University counted 76,247 permitted oil and gas wells across 14 coastal parishes between 1900 and 2017. More than 35,000 were on land. 27,000 are officially abandoned. The spoil banks left behind are, in total length, enough to cross coastal Louisiana east to west 79 times. The canals do 3 things at once. They remove marsh directly. They open channels for saltwater to reach freshwater plants that cannot survive it. And when those plants die, the roots holding the soil together go with them. And the spoil banks starve everything behind them of the sediment that would otherwise rebuild it. How much of the total loss this accounts for is genuinely disputed. Some researchers put the canals at the top of the list. Others, weight levee driven, sediment starvation, and deep subsidence equally or higher. The argument is about proportion, not existence. What is not in dispute is what it looks like from the air. Marsh does not produce right angles. It produces curves, meanders, braided channels, nothing straight. From a few thousand feet up, long stretches of the Louisiana coast are scored with a grid. 20,000 miles of straight lines cut into a place that has none, and almost none of them ever filled back in. Roughly 45 miles northwest of Baton Rouge, near a town called Simmesport, the Mississippi passes within a few hundred yards of the Atchafalaya. A 2-lane state highway runs across the structures between them. On one side, the Mississippi. On the other, the Atchafalaya, sitting more than 20 feet lower. The Mississippi has been trying to take that drop for most of a century. The Atchafalaya offers the river a route to the Gulf, about 150 miles shorter and more than twice as steep. Left to itself, water takes the steeper path. The Mississippi would have moved decades ago. Since 1963, it has been prevented from doing so by a single engineering complex, which holds the split at roughly 70-30. Most of the flow continuing past Baton Rouge and New Orleans, about 30% going down the Atchafalaya through the middle of Cajun Country. In the flood of 1973, the complex nearly lost. Scour dug the foundation out from under about half the main control structure. The Corps' own account describes the damage as permanent and irrevocable. The structure had been designed to hold a maximum difference of 37 feet between the two rivers. Afterward, engineers lowered the safe maximum to 22. For 3.5 years, crews drilled holes the size of dinner plates through the highway on top of the structure and pumped grout into the cavities underneath, filling the voids like fillings in a row of teeth. They left the gates open the whole time because the structure was under less strain when it was not fighting. If it ever fails, the river goes down the Atchafalaya and starts a new delta below Morgan City. Baton Rouge and New Orleans are left on a diminished channel. The most permanent feature on the American map is being held in place by hand, and the hand has already slipped once. On the morning of the 20th of November, 1980, a drilling crew on a platform in the middle of Lake Peigneur in Iberia Parish found that their bit had jammed. Lake Peigneur was about 11 feet deep across roughly 1,300 acres, a shallow, unremarkable fishing lake with a botanical garden on the island at its edge. Underneath it, the Diamond Crystal Company had been mining salt since 1920. Shafts as wide as a 4-lane highway, ceilings 80 feet high, held up by pillars of salt left standing in place. Louisiana sits above at least 128 cataloged salt domes. 5 of them push up far enough to read as low hills in otherwise flat country. They are drilled for oil and mined for salt, sometimes in the same place at the same time. The bit had gone into the mine. Water started running down the hole, and salt does what salt does in water. The pillars dissolved. The roof came down, the opening widened, and the lake began draining into the ground. The crew got off the platform in time to watch it capsize and disappear into water that had been too shallow to swim in that morning. A second rig went. 11 barges went. A tugboat went. About 65 acres of surrounding land went, including most of the garden. The canal connecting the lake to the Gulf reversed direction and poured in as a waterfall. Nobody was killed. Within 2 days, 9 of the barges came back up. Lake Peigneur refilled, far deeper and permanently saltwater, because there is now an open connection down to a layer of salt that has not stopped dissolving. The ground under Cajun Country is not solid. In 1980, a drill bit demonstrated it by emptying a lake into the hole. In the 1,960 seconds, something close to 1 million people in Louisiana spoke French. The most recent census estimates put it well under 100,000. That collapse is usually described as natural. The ordinary way an immigrant language thins out across 3 generations. It was not natural. In 1916, the State Board of Education banned French from Louisiana classrooms, and the state constitution of 1921 required that public school instruction be conducted in English. The children this landed on did not speak English. Many had not heard much of it outside a schoolroom. The enforcement is documented in oral histories held at LSU and elsewhere. Children were whipped. They were made to write, "I will not speak French" on the school grounds 1,000 times over. They were made to kneel on rice and to do manual labor for speaking the only language they had. The rule itself is not what killed the language. What killed it is what that generation did afterward. They raised their own children in English, deliberately to spare them. Languages do not usually die in classrooms. They die at kitchen tables in a decision made by a parent who has concluded their child will not go through what they went through. By around 1960, the punishments had largely stopped, and historians are direct about why. There were almost no children left speaking French to punish. The 1974 Constitution reversed the policy. A state agency, CODOFIL, has been rebuilding French instruction since 1968, and in 2018, Louisiana was admitted as an observing member of the International Organization of French-Speaking Governments, the only American state ever accepted. The state now seeking a seat among the French-speaking nations of the world is the same state that took the language out of its own children. Island Road runs south through Lower Terrebonne Parish as a 2-lane strip of asphalt with open water on both sides, and nothing else. At the end of it is Ile de Jean Charles, a cluster of houses on stilts, a few hand-painted signs from people who are not leaving, and about 320 acres of ground. In 1955, the island was more than 22,000 acres. That is a 98% loss, and it is why in January 2016, the Department of Housing and Urban Development awarded Louisiana $92 million, of which $48 million was set aside to move the community inland. It was the first federally funded, community-scale climate relocation in the continental United States. The state bought a 515-acre former sugarcane field near Schriever, 40 miles away. The community is the Ile de Jean Charles Band of Biloxi Chitimacha Choctaw. Their ancestors settled that ground in the early 1800 seconds, partly because it was remote enough to escape forced removal. Nearly 2 centuries later, the tribal council concluded the state had rewritten the resettlement plan they themselves had submitted, and formally withdrew, walking away from money raised in their name. They are not the only unrecognized nation down here. The United Houma Nation has somewhere between 17 and 19,000 members across 6 parishes, which makes it one of the largest state-recognized tribes in the country. It is not federally recognized. Its petition was denied in 1994 and has been under appeal ever since. When Deepwater Horizon destroyed the marshes, the Houma Fish and Trap, the tribe applied for damages and was refused because federally, the tribe does not exist. The process requires documentary proof of continuous existence from a community whose records and whose land both keep going underwater. Order shrimp at a restaurant in South Louisiana, and an assumption comes with it that what is on the plate came off a boat somewhere close by, from a family that has been doing this for 4 generations. Roughly 90% of the shrimp eaten in the United States is imported and pond-raised, mostly from India, Ecuador, Indonesia, and Vietnam. Imports went from under 250 million pounds in 1980 to nearly 2 billion pounds by 2022. Gulf dockside value, adjusted for inflation, fell from close to $5 a pound to about $2.50 across the same period, and some Louisiana docks have paid as little as 45 cents. Gulf wild-caught shrimp revenue dropped from $329 million in 2022 to $204 million in 2023, 38% in 1 year. In 2024, Louisiana landed under 60 million pounds of shrimp. The last time that happened was 1975. At a state task force meeting in Houma, processors said out loud what the industry already knew. Restaurants were serving imported shrimp to customers who believed they were eating local. The legislature passed a labeling law in 2024 to force the question. Then, there is the crawfish. After the drought of 2023, the warmest year on record in Louisiana, with 3/4 of the state in exceptional drought, the mud in the ponds set too hard for the females to dig out and spawn. The 2024 harvest came in 50 to 90% below normal across all 365,000 crawfish acres in the state. Mardi Gras 2024 happened without crawfish. The state agriculture commissioner put that in writing to the federal government. Set these against each other, and the picture is worse than any one of them alone. The prairie was plowed, so the culture moved toward the water. The bayou was closed in 1903, so the water stopped delivering new land. The canals opened the marsh to salt, so what remained came apart faster than it could rebuild. The river that would replace all of it is pinned in place near Simmesport by a structure that has already been undermined once. And the economy that kept people out on that coast while all of this was happening, shrimp, oysters, crawfish, is now being squeezed from a completely unrelated direction by global aquaculture and by drought. Which brings it to a point. In April 2025, a jury in Plaquemines Parish ordered Chevron to pay roughly $745 million for coastal damage, the first of 42 parish lawsuits filed since 2013 to reach a verdict. In 2026, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled unanimously for Chevron on a narrow procedural question about which court should hear the case, putting that verdict at risk and reopening the same question across all the others. So, the damage has now been priced. What is being fought over is jurisdiction. And the largest plan ever built to reverse it was canceled by the state, with the money still in the account, over the objection of its own scientists and with the support of the fishermen it would have affected. That is the hardest fact in this story. The choice on this coast is not between saving it and losing it. It is between two versions of loss, and the people who live there were never unanimous about which one they preferred. Drive that road south again past Houma out to where the asphalt narrows and the water closes in on both sides, and it looks exactly the way it did at the start. Houses on pilings, boats underneath them. A church with French names cut into the cornerstone. It still reads as a place the weather is slowly taking back. It isn't. Every element of that view has a date attached to it. The ground under the road stopped being replenished in 1903. The marsh on either side was opened by canals cut in the 50s and 60s. The water is salt because of channels somebody dredged and nobody filled. The town at the end of the road is losing people because the shrimp price collapsed and the insurance did not hold. And the single piece of concrete that could have started putting ground back stopped being built in the summer of 2025. Cajun Country is not being taken by the Gulf. It is being handed over, one decision at a time, by people who have names and are mostly still alive. If you want more of these, subscribe.